My name is Jake Warner, and I live in a quiet suburb of Denver, Colorado. I'm 38 years old, a regional sales manager for a chain of hardware stores. My wife, Amanda, is 36, a freelance graphic designer who works from home. We've been married for 12 years and have two kids, Emily, 10, and Max, 7. Life is the picture of suburban stability, or at least it was. It all started on a crisp Saturday morning in late October. I was cleaning out the garage, preparing it for the colder months. Amanda had left early to catch up with her friend Jill at a downtown coffee shop. She mentioned something about helping Jill pick out decorations for her upcoming anniversary party. That's Amanda for you. Always eager to help someone else. Always busy with something. By mid-morning, I was rummaging through an old toolbox when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Jill. "Hey, Jake, could you remind Amanda to send over the graphics for the invitations? She hasn't replied to my texts." That didn't sit right with me. Amanda was supposed to be with Jill. Why would Jill need to text me about invitations when she was supposedly with my wife? I shot back a quick response. "She's not with you right now." The three little dots of Jill typing appeared almost immediately. "No, haven't seen her since last week. Is everything okay?" I stared at the message, my heart sinking. Something wasn't adding up. I decided not to reply to Jill. Instead, I left the garage half-finished and went back into the house. Amanda's laptop was on the dining table, where she usually worked. It wasn't like me to snoop. I trusted Amanda. But something gnawed at me, a feeling I couldn't shake. I opened the laptop, half hoping I'd find some innocent explanation. Her email was logged in. As I scrolled through her inbox, my stomach dropped. There were dozens of emails from someone named Brandon. Some were about work, but others weren't. I clicked on one of the more recent ones, dated just 2 days ago. The subject line read, "Can't stop thinking about you." The message was short but damning. "Last night was incredible. I don't know how we keep this up, but I can't stay away. Can't wait to see you again this weekend. B." I sat back, my hands trembling. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. But then I noticed an attachment. It was a selfie of Amanda and a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, athletic, probably mid-30s, with sandy blonde hair and a grin that made my blood boil. The selfie wasn't scandalous on its own. They were just sitting at a restaurant table smiling. But it wasn't a restaurant I'd ever been to with her. The timestamp on the photo read 11:24 p.m. last Friday. She had told me she was working late. I sat there, staring at the laptop screen, the cursor blinking at me like a taunt. My mind raced with questions. Who was Brandon? How long had this been going on? And, most importantly, what was I going to do about it? Before I could let the anger take over, I heard the front door open. Amanda's voice echoed from the hallway, light and cheerful. "Hey, I'm back. Did you get the garage sorted?" I slammed the laptop shut, my heart hammering against my ribcage. I barely had time to shove it back on the table before she walked into the room, her scarf trailing behind her like a banner. She looked radiant. Flushed cheeks, bright eyes, a smile that could light up a room. "You're home early," I said, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. "I thought you were spending the day with Jill." Amanda froze for just a fraction of a second, barely enough for anyone to notice. "But I did." "Oh, we finished up early," she said breezily. "She had to run some errands, so I figured I'd come back and help you with the garage." She kissed me on the cheek and started unbuttoning her coat. I felt the warmth of her lips linger like an ember, even as the back of my mind screamed at me. Was that the same kiss she gave Brandon? Did she rush back here after meeting him? "I could use the help," I said, forcing a smile. "But first, can you answer something for me?" She looked up, startled. "Sure. What's up?" "Jill texted me," I said, watching her carefully. "She said she hasn't seen you all day." Amanda blinked. Her face didn't crumble into guilt or panic. Instead, she laughed, a soft, lilting sound. "Oh, Jake, Jill's memory is awful. We were only together for an hour or so. I guess it didn't make much of an impression on her." The way she dismissed it so casually made my blood boil. But I wasn't ready to show my hand yet. Instead, I nodded and let her words hang in the air. Later that night, when Amanda was busy helping Emily with her science project, I grabbed my phone and went to the one place I could vent. My best friend, Greg. We'd known each other since college. He was the kind of guy you could call at midnight and know he'd show up without asking why. I sent him a quick text. "Need to talk. Big stuff. Are you around?" His reply came almost instantly. "Always. Swing by my place. I've got beer." I pulled up to Greg's house about half an hour later. It was one of those cozy bachelor pads, with a pool table in the living room and a fridge perpetually stocked with craft beer. Greg greeted me at the door in sweatpants and a Broncos hoodie. "What's the big stuff?" he asked as he handed me a bottle. I told him everything. The emails, the photo, the lie about Jill. Greg listened, his expression growing darker with every word. "Man, that's rough," he said finally. "But are you sure? Like 100%? I took a long sip of my beer, the bitterness cutting through the lump in my throat. "There's no way it's innocent, Greg. She's been meeting this guy, sneaking around and lying to my face." Greg leaned back on the couch, running a hand through his hair. "Okay, so what's your plan? Are you going to confront her? Follow her? Hire a PI? I hadn't thought that far ahead. My brain was still stuck in first gear trying to process the betrayal. "I don't know," I admitted. I need to know the truth." Greg nodded, his eyes narrowing. "All right then, we find the truth." Greg and I sat in his dimly lit living room, the kind of quiet only broken by the occasional crackle of his space heater. He leaned forward, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Jake," he said, swirling his beer, "if you want the truth, we're going to have to do some digging. And lucky for you, I've got the perfect plan." I raised an eyebrow, unsure whether to be intrigued or worried. "Go on." Greg leaned back, propping his feet up on the coffee table. "We follow her. Not in some shady, amateur way, though. We do it with a system, patterns, proof. You're going to document her every move for a week. Wherever she says she's going, you verify it. And if there's a crack in her story, we'll know." I wasn't sure if I felt more like a detective or a lunatic, but it didn't matter. The idea was already taking root in my mind. "You're serious about this?" I asked. "As a heart attack," Greg said, smirking. "And I've got gadgets." The next day, Greg showed up at my house, carrying a duffel bag that looked like it had been lifted straight out of a spy movie. He dumped the contents onto my kitchen table: a GPS tracker, a tiny voice recorder, and what looked suspiciously like a pair of high-tech binoculars. "Where the hell did you get all this?" I asked, picking up the GPS tracker. "Internet," Greg said nonchalantly. "Don't ask too many questions." Amanda was in the shower, so I had a small window of time. Greg helped me attach the tracker to the underside of Amanda's car. A small magnetic device, no bigger than a matchbox. "Step 1, Greg said as we tightened the screws, "we track her movements. If she says she's going to yoga and ends up at Brandon's place, we've got her." I wasn't proud of what I was doing, but I couldn't shake the memory of that email. The way she'd smiled at me last night, as if nothing had happened, made my skin crawl. I needed to know, even if the truth shattered me. By Tuesday, I was neck-deep in my new role as suburban espionage artist. Amanda's routines were almost frustratingly mundane. A trip to the grocery store, coffee with a friend, actually Jill this time, and a yoga class at a local studio. But then Wednesday rolled around and everything changed. Amanda left the house around 2 p.m., saying she was meeting a client downtown. I checked the GPS tracker from my phone app as soon as she pulled out of the driveway. "Let's see where you're really going," I muttered. For the first 15 minutes, the dot on the map followed the expected path toward the city center. But then it veered off, a sharp left onto a side street, another left, and then it stopped. The address wasn't a coffee shop or a client's office. It was a residential home. I parked a few houses down, watching from the safety of my car. Amanda's car was in the driveway, alongside a silver Audi. I checked my phone again. The GPS confirmed it. She was inside. Heart pounding, I grabbed the binoculars Greg had insisted I bring. From my vantage point, I could see the house was quiet. The curtains were drawn, and there was no sign of movement. I waited, my stomach twisting itself into knots. After what felt like an eternity, the front door opened. A man stepped out, tall, blonde, and unmistakably Brandon. I ducked lower in my seat as he walked to the Audi, casually grabbing something from the passenger seat before heading back inside. That was it, the proof I needed. My wife wasn't at a client meeting. She was here with him. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The scene played out in my mind like a slow-motion disaster. Amanda's car in Brandon's driveway, his casual stroll back into the house. It was real. I had the proof. But what now? Greg's words echoed in my head. "We find the truth." Well, I'd found it. And now it was time for the next step. I called Greg. "She's with him," I said without preamble. "Where?" His voice was sharp, all business. Some house off Colfax and Birch. She's inside now. There was a pause. All right. Listen, Jake. Don't do anything stupid. Come back here, and we'll figure out the best way to handle this. I hesitated, staring at the house. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to march up to the door and demand answers. But Greg was right. I needed to play the smart. Fine, I said. I'll be there in 20. By the time I got to Greg's place, he had already spread out a battle plan on his coffee table. Literally, he'd drawn a diagram of possible ways to approach this, complete with stick figures and arrows. You're insane, I muttered, dropping onto his couch. Insane? Or prepared? He shot back. Look, Jake, you've got to decide what you want out of this. Do you just want answers? Or do you want leverage? I stared at the crude drawing, my mind racing. I want her to tell me the truth, I said finally. Greg nodded. All right, then here's what we do. You're going to set a trap. We spent the next hour hashing out the plan. Step 1 was simple. Act like everything was normal. If Amanda suspected anything, she'd either deny it or shut everything down before I got the full story. Step 2 required patience. I'd wait for her next client meeting and follow her again. But this time, I wouldn't just sit in my car. I'd get closer, maybe even confront her while she was still with Brandon. The element of surprise would be my weapon. Jake, Greg said, his tone serious. You sure you're ready for this? Once you go in, there's no turning back. I nodded, more determined than ever. I need to know. 2 days later, the opportunity came. Amanda told me she had a late-night project with a client and wouldn't be home until after 10 p.m. The lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly, I almost believed her. I waited until she left, then grabbed my keys and followed the familiar GPS done on my phone. It led me to the same house. This time, I parked closer, just down the street. I crept up to the edge of the property, my heart pounding in my chest. Through a crack in the curtains, I could see them in the living room. Amanda was laughing at something Brandon said, her hand resting on his arm. I clenched my fists, every muscle in my body screaming at me to storm in. But then, Amanda leaned forward and kissed him. That was the breaking point. I stood frozen at the edge of Brandon's property. The image of Amanda kissing him seared into my mind. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a misstep. It was deliberate, intentional. My breath came in shallow gasps as I backed away from the house, my footsteps silent on the damp grass. Confronting her now wouldn't just be impulsive. It would be catastrophic. No, I needed to stick to the plan no matter how much it twisted like a knife in my gut. I returned to my car, gripping the steering wheel with both hands as I tried to steady myself. Greg had been clear. The goal wasn't just to catch her, but to control the fallout. And right now, I had none of that control. By the time I made it back to Greg's house, he was waiting with his six-pack and his usual unshakable composure. I dropped into the chair across from him and raked a hand through my hair. Well, he asked. They're lovers, I said flatly. No doubt about it. Greg nodded, passing me a beer. All right, now we make her squirm. What does that even mean? I snapped. Greg smirked. We don't confront her directly. Not yet. We make her think the walls are closing in. Let her unravel herself. Trust me, Jake, guilt is a powerful weapon. The next morning, I returned home early before Amanda got back. I acted like everything was normal. The kids were already at school, and Amanda had texted me that she'd be home around noon. Perfect, Greg had told me on the phone earlier. Leave her a breadcrumb, something that'll make her nervous. I opened the junk drawer in the kitchen and pulled out a sticky note. In bold, deliberate handwriting, I wrote 3 words. I know everything. I stuck it inside her jewelry box, where she'd inevitably find it when she got ready for her afternoon yoga session. When Amanda walked through the door, I greeted her like I always did. A peck on the cheek, a quick exchange about our days. She seemed relaxed, even happy. Anything interesting happened today? I asked, watching her carefully. Nope, just work, she replied, opening the fridge to grab a drink. Glad to hear it, I said, forcing a smile. For the rest of the evening, I waited for her to find the note. I watched her closely at dinner, looking for any sign of unease. But Amanda was her usual self, chatty, affectionate, the picture of a devoted wife. It wasn't until later, when she went upstairs to shower, that I heard the sound of her jewelry box opening. I positioned myself near the stairs, Close enough to hear, but not so close that it would be obvious. There was silence at first, then the soft rustle of paper. "Jake," Amanda called, her voice higher than usual. I forced myself to wait a beat before responding. "Yeah, did you leave me a note?" I walked upstairs, keeping my expression neutral. "What note?" She held up the sticky note, her hand trembling slightly. "This. It was in my jewelry box." I frowned, pretending to be confused. "No. Why?" Amanda's eyes darted to the note and back to me. "It's just weird. I thought maybe you were playing a joke." I shook my head. "Not me. Maybe one of the kids." She laughed nervously. "Yeah, maybe." But as I walked away, I saw the first crack in her facade. She was rattled. Later that night, when she thought I was asleep, Amanda slipped out of bed and went downstairs. I followed her quietly, careful not to make a sound. She was on the phone. "I don't know," she whispered, pacing the living room. "It was just a note, but what if he knows?" Brandon's voice crackled faintly through the speaker, too muffled for me to hear his exact words. "No, I haven't said anything," she continued, "but I feel like he's watching me. Maybe it's just my imagination, but I can't take that chance." Her voice wavered, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. "I'll figure it out," she said finally. "I just need time." I crept back upstairs before she saw me, my mind racing. Greg was right. The guilt was eating away at her, and it was only a matter of time before she cracked. The game had officially begun. The next morning, Amanda was unusually quiet. She moved around the house like a ghost, her usual routine subdued by an unspoken tension. Every time I caught her eye, she looked away, her lips pressing into a thin line. The note had done its job. It had planted the seed of paranoia. I played my role perfectly, acting as if I hadn't noticed anything. Over breakfast, I even cracked a joke about her spacing out, which earned a half-hearted laugh. Inside, I relished the way her composure was unraveling, piece by piece. That afternoon, I decided to escalate. Greg had suggested another breadcrumb, something subtle but unmistakable. I sent Amanda a text from an anonymous number using an app Greg had found. "Brandon isn't as careful as you think. A friend." I watched from the living room as Amanda's phone buzzed on the counter. She picked it up, and her face paled as she read the message. "Something wrong?" I asked casually, not looking up from the sports section of the paper. Amanda jumped slightly, clutching the phone to her chest. "No, nothing," she said quickly. "Just spam." I nodded, hiding my smirk behind the newspaper. That evening, Amanda's nerves were frayed. She jumped whenever her phone buzzed, and she was uncharacteristically affectionate toward me. When I came home from the store, she greeted me at the door with a hug that lingered a little too long. "Everything okay?" I asked, feigning concern. "Of course," she said brightly, but her voice wavered. "I just wanted to say thank you. For everything. You've been so good to me." Her words were like a knife twisting in my chest. I managed a tight smile, but inside, the anger simmered. The next morning, Greg called. "How's she holding up?" he asked. "She's cracking," I said. "She's jumpy, nervous, and she started overcompensating. She even hugged me out of nowhere last night." Greg chuckled. "Good. That means the guilt is working. Now it's time to tighten the noose." The next phase of the plan was simple. Make Amanda doubt Brandon. If I could turn her fear into suspicion, she'd be too distracted to keep her lies straight. The following day, while Amanda was out running errands, I slipped into her home office. I found Brandon's emails easily. She hadn't even bothered to delete them. One email in particular stood out. It was from Brandon, sent just a week ago. "I miss you. Can't wait to see you Friday. Let's make it an overnight this time." I forwarded the email to Amanda's inbox, changing the sender to read, "Unknown." That evening, as Amanda checked her emails, I watched her carefully. Her eyes widened as she opened the forwarded message, and she immediately reached for her phone. I didn't need to hear the conversation to know what was happening. From the kitchen, I saw her pacing the living room, her voice low but urgent. "I don't know how it got there," she hissed into the phone. "Someone forwarded it to me. What if Jake sees it? What if he already knows?" I slipped away before she saw me, satisfied that the seeds of doubt had been sown. By the next morning, Amanda was a wreck. She barely touched her breakfast and left the house without saying goodbye. I checked the GPS tracker as soon as she pulled out of the driveway. Sure enough, she was heading to Brandon's house. This time, I followed her more closely, When she pulled into Brandon's driveway, I parked a few houses down and waited. I didn't have to wait long. Barely 10 minutes later, Brandon came out onto the porch, his arms crossed as Amanda gestured wildly, her voice carrying just enough for me to catch snippets. "I can't do this anymore. Someone knows we're being watched." Brandon's reply was calm, almost dismissive. I couldn't hear his exact words, but his body language was clear. He didn't take her seriously. Amanda's frustration boiled over. She jabbed a finger at him, her voice rising. "You don't understand. This could ruin everything." I sat back in my car, watching the cracks in their relationship grow wider. The doubt was working. Back home, I texted Greg. "She's starting to lose it." His reply came quickly. "Good. Let's push her over the edge." The next evening, Amanda barely spoke during dinner. She picked at her food, her eyes darting to her phone every few seconds. Max and Emily didn't seem to notice, too caught up in recounting their day at school, but I could see Amanda's nerves fraying further. I decided it was time for the next move, a direct escalation. After dinner, when Amanda went upstairs to finish a project, I went into the garage and grabbed an old manila envelope. Inside, I placed copies of the damning evidence. Photos from my car stakeouts, screenshots of her emails with Brandon, and a printout of the forwarded message I'd sent to her anonymously. I scrawled one word on the front of the envelope in bold, black marker. Why? At midnight, when Amanda was asleep, I slipped the envelope into her car. I tucked it under the passenger seat, ensuring she'd find it the next morning. The anticipation buzzed in my chest like electricity. The following morning, I stayed home under the guise of a late work start. Amanda seemed relieved by my distraction, pouring herself an extra cup of coffee before rushing out the door. I watched from the kitchen window as she opened her car door and slid into the driver's seat. For a moment, I thought she might not notice the envelope. But then she froze. Her head whipped around, and she reached down, pulling the envelope from under the seat. Her reaction was immediate. She opened it, and even from inside the house, I could see her body tense. Her hands shook as she flipped through the contents. Finally, she dropped the envelope onto the passenger seat and buried her face in her hands. I couldn't hear her, but I could imagine the panic rising inside her. For the rest of the day, I tracked her movements through the GPS. She didn't go to Brandon's house this time. Instead, she drove aimlessly for hours, stopping only at a park near the edge of the city. By the time she came home, her face was pale, her eyes rimmed with red. "Long day?" I asked, feigning innocence. "Yeah," she said softly, not meeting my gaze. "Just stressful." I nodded, pretending to go back to my laptop. But my heart pounded with satisfaction. The guilt was eating her alive. Later that evening, as I was brushing my teeth, I heard Amanda on the phone in the next room. Her voice was hushed but urgent. "I think Jake knows," she whispered. "I found an envelope in my car with pictures, emails, everything." Brandon's voice came through faintly, calm and dismissive as always. "No, you don't understand," she snapped, her voice breaking. "He's not saying anything, but he's leaving me these breadcrumbs. I can't live like this." There was a pause. "Then tell him," Brandon said finally. "Rip the Band-Aid off." I froze, my toothbrush halfway to my mouth. Was she going to take his advice? Would she finally confess? The next morning, Amanda was waiting for me at the kitchen table when I came downstairs. She had a mug of coffee in her hands, but it was untouched. Her face was pale, and her hands trembled slightly as she set the mug down. "Jake," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" My heart raced. This was it. I nodded, keeping my expression calm. "Of course. What's on your mind?" She hesitated, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. Then, finally, she took a deep breath. "I need to tell you something. About us." I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "Go on." Amanda took another shaky breath, her fingers tightening around the edge of the coffee table. For a moment, I thought she might back out, but then she met my gaze, and the dam finally broke. "I've been seeing someone," she said, her voice cracking. It's Brandon." Hearing her say it aloud was both devastating and satisfying. There was no more ambiguity, no room for denial. She had admitted it. "How long?" I asked, my tone flat, devoid of emotion. Amanda flinched, as if the words themselves were a blow. 6 months, she whispered. I never meant for it to happen, Jake. I swear. It just did. The way she tried to frame it, as if it were some uncontrollable force, made my blood boil. But I kept my composure, forcing myself to stay calm. How did it start? I pressed. She hesitated, her hands fidgeting in her lap. It started with work, she said finally. He's a client. We had a few meetings and, I don't know, we just clicked. Clicked. I repeated, my voice sharper now. You clicked so much that you decided to betray your husband and your family? Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. This was the same woman who had kissed Brandon in his driveway just days ago. Whatever remorse she was feeling now was too little, too late. Why didn't you just tell me you were unhappy? I asked, leaning forward. Why sneak around? Why lie? I didn't know how to, she said, her voice trembling. And I didn't want to hurt you. I laughed bitterly, the sound cold and hollow. Didn't want to hurt me? Amanda, you've been lying to my face for 6 months. Don't stand there and tell me you were worried about my feelings. She looked away, her tears spilling over. You have every right to hate me, she said softly. I stood up, pacing the room as my thoughts raced. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to throw something, to unleash the full force of my anger. But another part of me, the rational part, knew that wouldn't accomplish anything. You're going to end it with him, I said finally, stopping to face her. Today. Amanda's eyes widened. Jake. No. I cut her off. No excuses, no explanations. If you want even the slightest chance of saving this marriage, you're going to cut him off completely. And I mean completely. She nodded quickly, her tears flowing freely now. I will. I promise. As she sat there, sobbing in her hands, I realized the power dynamic had shifted. For months, Amanda had been in control, deceiving me, choosing her moments, deciding how far to push. But now she was at my mercy, and I wasn't done yet. Give me your phone, I said, holding out my hand. Amanda froze. Why? Because I want to see everything, I said. Texts, calls, emails. If you're serious about fixing this, you'll show me all of it. For a moment, she hesitated, and I thought she might refuse. But then, with trembling hands, she unlocked her phone and handed it to me. The texts were worse than I'd imagined. Brandon wasn't just some casual fling. He was a full-blown emotional affair. The messages were filled with pet names, inside jokes, and declarations of love. One message in particular made my stomach turn. I wish we didn't have to sneak around anymore. One day, we'll be together for real. I set the phone down, my hands shaking with rage. Do you love him? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Amanda looked at me, her face pale and stricken. I don't know, she said. I thought I did, but now I just want my family back. Convenient, I said bitterly. Now that you're caught, you suddenly want to come running back to me? She didn't answer, her silence speaking volumes. I stepped back, running a hand through my hair as the weight of it all pressed down on me. This wasn't something that could be fixed with apologies and promises. The damage Amanda had done was deep, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be repaired. You've got one chance, Amanda, I said finally. One. You cut him off, you stay away from him, and you show me that you're willing to put in the work to fix this. Otherwise, we're done. She nodded frantically, her tears flowing freely. I will. I swear. But as I walked out of the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Amanda spent the rest of the day in a state of quiet desperation. She locked herself in the home office for hours, likely crafting the message that would sever her ties with Brandon. I made it clear that I expected full transparency. If she was serious about saving our marriage, this was her chance to prove it. Around 4 p.m., she emerged from the office, her face pale and tear-streaked. I sent him a message, she said quietly, holding out her phone. I took it from her, scrolling to the text she had sent just minutes earlier. Brandon, I can't do this anymore. Jake knows everything, and I need to focus on my family. Please don't contact me again. It was short, decisive, and everything I demanded. Yet, a nagging voice in my head told me it wouldn't be enough. Did he respond? I asked. She shook her head. Not yet. I handed the phone back to her. If he does, you tell me immediately. Understood? Amanda nodded, her expression a mix of guilt and exhaustion. For the next few days, things were quiet, almost too quiet. Amanda made an effort to be attentive, spending more time with the kids, cooking meals from scratch, and even suggesting a weekend getaway for the family. On the surface, it seemed like she was trying to make amends. But underneath, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. On Thursday, while Amanda was out grocery shopping, Greg stopped by. He walked into the living room, dropping a small black device onto the coffee table. "What's that?" I asked. "Voice recorder," Greg said with a grin. "I snag it online. Tiny, discreet, and perfect for keeping tabs." I frowned, picking up the device. "Where do you expect me to use this?" Greg leaned back on the couch, his expression serious. "Amanda might have sent that text, but what's stopping Brandon from contacting her in person? If he's as smooth as you say he is, he'll try to weasel his way back in." I hated to admit it, but Greg had a point. "So what's the plan?" I asked. Greg smirked. "We plant this in her car. If they meet up again, we'll know." That evening, while Amanda was helping Max with his math homework, I slipped into the garage. I opened the glove compartment of her car, carefully tucking the recorder into a hidden corner. It activated automatically when sound was detected, meaning it would only capture conversations if they happened. I closed the glove compartment and stepped back, my chest tight with a mix of guilt and resolve. The first few days yielded nothing. Amanda's routine was uneventful: school drop-offs, errands, a yoga class, and a lunch with Jill. But on Saturday, the recorder captured something that sent my blood boiling. It was faint at first, the sound of a car door opening and closing, followed by muffled voices. Then, clear as day, I heard Brandon's voice. "I miss you, Amanda." My grip on the recorder tightened as the conversation continued. "I told you, we can't do this anymore," Amanda said, her voice trembling. "I know," Brandon replied, "but I can't let you go that easily. Do you really think he's going to forgive you? You're fooling yourself if you think you can fix things with him." There was a long silence. When Amanda spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "Just leave me alone, Brandon. Please." I played the recording for Greg that evening, my anger barely contained. "She lied," I said, pacing the room. "She told me she was done with him, but she's still meeting him." Greg nodded, his expression grim. "She might have sent the text, but clearly he's still in the picture. You need to confront her. This time, you need to go all in." That night, I waited until the kids were in bed before calling Amanda into the living room. I sat on the couch, the recorder in my hand, and gestured for her to sit across from me. "What's this about?" she asked, her eyes darting to the recorder. "You tell me," I said, hitting play. As Brandon's voice filled the room, Amanda's face drained of color. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. "You lied to me," I said, my voice low and cold. "You told me it was over, but here you are, meeting him again. How stupid do you think I am?" Amanda shook her head frantically. "Jake, I didn't plan that meeting. He showed up out of nowhere. I told him to leave. I swear." "Save it," I snapped. "I'm done with the excuses, Amanda. I gave you one chance, and you blew it." Her eyes filled with tears. "Please, Jake. I'll block him. I'll change my number, whatever it takes. Just give me another chance." I stood up, my heart pounding. "You don't get another chance, Amanda. This marriage is over." Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. New cheating wife stories tomorrow.